It is my privilege and joy that we can start a new Bible study about the least of these. And this title is taken from Matthew 25 from verse 40, where Jesus explains a parable about the end judgment or the final judgment, and where he puts the one at his right side and the other on his left side. And when he says here, "And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, insomuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me." So what was it that they did? And why do we have on earth people in need and suffering? What was it that the judge of the whole universe says, "You did it unto me"? We read from verse 35, Matthew 25. "For I was an hungered, and he gave me meat. I was thirsty, and he gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. Naked, and he clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and he came unto me." And we could continue this list of negative things, of need and suffering, and could ask ourselves, why are people there? Now, here, these people do something about it. Evidently, it's there. But how did it come in? And why are people in need and suffering? We want to look in this quarter to find out the why of suffering, the reason of suffering, and we want to see how we can make a real difference in this world, so that we might get that invitation that the judge of the earth gives to those on his right side, that he invites them to come as blessed, to inherit the kingdom of the Father, the kingdom that was made from the beginning of the world. Humanity, humans, were made to think and to act. That means everything that a human does starts in his thoughts. His actions are just a revealing of his thoughts. And since he was created for self-control, each of the actions of a human is the result of his decision. That's very important to know. I mean, it's sometimes very surprising when I tell my patient that their diseases come from their decisions, from their thoughts. They say, how can a thought do that? Now, I must explain them that everything that we do in our body is the result of our decision. That I speak, that I move and gesture, that I open my eye or close them, whatever I do, it's nothing else than the result of my decision. So how then can disease come from something else than from our decisions? So it's evident. This body is just non-able to do anything if the spirit of man does not command him to do it. So everything a man does is the result of his decisions, because he was made to control, to govern himself. Now, decisions have a root. Every decision is the result of his motivation. So every act that a man does that comes from his decisions is a result of the question, for whom do I do it? But even motivation has a root. And the root of the motivation is the source of the human's spirit's confidence or trust. So in whom do I trust to have the motivation, decision, and action? And the source of confidence has a root, and it comes out as the result of his identity. Identity is the root of all roots. I didn't find one more. I didn't find a identity. Where does identity come from? I mean, because identity is the beginning of every action or of every thought process, and then as an open action, because the thoughts are invisible, but the actions are visible. So this is humans, mankind. Mankind was made for this. And God created him for the purpose of governing and managing the earth and everything on it. God created a new solar system. He created the earth in it, and he put man as the manager, as the administrator, as the one that should govern all this according to the laws that he gave in the universe to do. And for this, God gave man an identity, like he gave everything that he created an identity. And there are only two identities at the root of all identities. It's either I'm a creature of God, I was made, or I made myself, I'm a God. So man knew that he was a creature of God, so the source of his trust could only be God, so the motivation could only be love and selflessness. You see, I know that God is unselfish. I know that God is love, because in his creation, his law shows that nothing was made for itself. Some people believe that man was created for himself. No, that was not the case. Nothing was created for itself. Everything was created to serve a purpose. Yes, it was done by God. God chose the purpose, but it was not done for God himself. He doesn't need anyone. So man was not made to God to have someone to discuss in the evening time or whenever. No, God created something, and he gave the greatest responsibility to the crown of creation, so to say, to mankind, to Adam and Eve. And they were there with love, selfless. All their decisions were right and good. Every one of their actions without fault. Out of Adam's mouth did not come one wrong word. His vocal cords didn't do anything that was not in according to the way they were created. And his hands did the same. And the consequences was multiplication of happiness on earth, the multiplication of their members, and the works that God made. So, in this way, nothing ever could happen on this earth to be wrong. But it happened. How did hardship, misery, and suffering appear on the earth? Well, there's one simple cause. The administrator or the steward wanted to become the owner. And this he did in accordance with the example of his tempter, Lucifer or Satan. When one was made a steward, why would he become an owner? You see, when you take Lucifer, Lucifer was given the highest position. Him was given the greatest means that God put to his position to use to administrate the universe. And now suddenly comes to the idea, or over the time, that all the means come from him, and this universe must be his. It's total stupidity, it's total irrationality, but not even God could stop him from this irrational way to think. And it's amazing that he seduced a third of the angels, and finally Adam and Eve. They joined him in thinking that now the earth is his. And all the means are there for himself. What a terrible result is this. The changed condition of humanity, now that he thinks I'm a creator or God, that things are mine, he has no source he thinks of trust, but he must have one, and he has Lucifer, the people and animals. His motivation now is not service. Well, yes, he serves, but in order to receive. Pride and selfishness, everything now turns around him. This earth is to exploit and make him happy from all the means, because he now thinks the means are for him, so he now keeps them, not knowing that that is self-destruction. His decisions are all wrong and destructive. His actions must be wrong, and the consequences must be multiplication of misfortune, suffering, and all that what we have today negative on earth. The earth, once blooming, once being in the full beauty, we can not even imagine how it was, becomes a place of woe, misery, and suffering. Not only for the humans, but the plants are destroyed, and there where once was grass, once was plenty of vegetation, now it is a desert. So everything happened just through one change. Now, to get even a little bit closer, let us look to a more foundational thing. When God created this universe, he did it all out of himself. He said, and it happened. He is the source of every energy. And everything that passes God is an effect. Love, the energy, time, and the universe that he created, that all had to work according to that law, that nothing can exist out of itself. All that is an effect of his power. And he put all under a fundamental law where he says, everyone has to share that power that he gives in order to give it. So he made everything to be an administrator, so that what is an effect we can use and can bring the final product, which is the fruit of it. So understanding this, that nothing can exist out of itself, that God must actively sustain all the elements, even though he gave to everyone its own administrating service, so to say, he still governs all the effect, because it's his power and it's his active power. Now, we as human made cars, we made freeways, and we even drive cars and this. And I trying to understand the implication of God in everything, I asked myself, and talking to God, I said, what would happen if God for 1 second or millisecond, no, it doesn't matter how much, but just for one little thing, he would not be actively keeping the connection of one atom to the other. You see, science has no explanation from the power that is in the atom and how they connect together. Now we can see the how, we can see that they connect, but by which power are they kept together? So that we can have steel and iron or whatever we can make cars out, or plastic. It's all chemical reactions that are kept together by a power. But whose power is it? And who keeps it actively that it should be there? and which would work. So I imagine if God would, for one moment, take his active power away, what would happen if I would drive on the Autobahn, freeway? What would happen in that moment? You see, in the moment, God would take actively his power away. All the elements that are bound together through his power, these connections would release. You know what would happen? It would not only that all car would stop, no, that might happen, but every element would disappear instantly. Because it's all kept together by an active power of God. Now that goes beyond our understanding. It goes beyond my mind. How God does that. But according to the law, since the law has no power in itself, God must actively govern every effect. Even that what we use, he still governs. If not, we would be for long death. Adam and Eve would have disappeared from the earth if God would not, in spite of their taking property, using means for themselves, if he would just have disconnected, if he would have just let go. No, God keeps everything. And he made that fundamental law and that secondary laws, that everything is time dependent, temperature, length, amount of substance, mass, light intensity, and electrical power. They all are his powers, his means that we have to use. But laws are only channels without power. It's so important to understand that the law is powerless. It's always God's power in the law that brings all power to it. So God actively sustains every chemical reaction by his power. If not, they could not bind. And if they could not bind, there will be no bindings. We would have nothing that is binding together. It just wouldn't exist. In a second, this iPad would just dissolve if God would not keep, through his power, all things active. Now, he is not the power as we have seen, it's an effect of him, but he keeps everything through his power in work. But he gave to Christ, that through Christ God created everything, and Christ created the angels, and he gave everyone a duty to do. And so Lucifer was the head of the circle of all circles under Christ. And then the angels had their own circles where they were the head of the circle. And then God created the whole universe after the same plan, after the same example, pattern. So Lucifer was the first one that came to the idea that he can become the owner of that what he was made to administrate. And he seduced a third of the angels in the same way. Even though it's total irrational and absolutely impossible, God could not stop him, even though he appealed to his reason. They went on their way, and after they did their final decision, God still didn't stop creating more of this universe. So he created this universe. He created our solar system with the earth on it. And he put the administrator there, which was Adam. He should be like Lucifer, or every that he put on the head of the circle, the connection of the power source to God. He should govern this whole solar system, in which the earth, he had there his residency, so to say. So everything God put in his hands. He should be the administrator. He had the greatest responsibility for all the living beings and non-living elements on earth. And since they're all connected together with moon and stars, I think it all affects it that way. To him was given clear things that life and happiness are dependent on conditions. Him was shown the law that he is an administrator of the powers of God. And if he would have remained faithful, everything would have gone very well. But he exalted himself. And by exalting himself, becoming a God, becoming, so to say, the owner of the earth, he stole the earth from God. He gave it to Lucifer because he became a subject of Lucifer. And by this, he brought all misery and suffering to our planet. So we find some parables in the Bible where Jesus explains that God gave his vineyard to some people to administrate, to manage it, to be stewards of them, of the vineyard. But what did they do? They stole the vineyard from God. And now it was their own. And when God sent his son to look after it, they killed him. Because it was their vineyard. Now, can ever a created being that has no power in itself, that would have disappeared in the moment that God would have taken off his power, his active power, to keeping the elements together? This creature that was made so high to think, that must understand the things, how could it ever come to think like this? This is the mystery of sin. It's the mystery of deception. How can that be? That Adam and Eve got into this wrong situation to think they're gods. So, as a conclusion, why do we have so much undescribable suffering and misery in the world? Why do we have it? Why do we have sick people? You know that all those sicknesses come because humans think they're owners of themselves, of others, and of the means that God gave them to use just. Sickness is the result of ownership. I didn't find any disease yet. I didn't find any patient yet that was not in this mindset. And the mind trouble destroyed his physical being. Because the main power of all things come from what we think. And if love would be the motivation, like it was in Jesus Christ, no disease could ever touch his body. So disease and suffering is the result that man is an owner. He's possessive, while he can never possess anything, neither his life, nor his body, nor anything that is around him. Nothing he can ever possess, being a creature. Why do we have people that hunger or must beg for food on earth or any other things? Why do we have millions of people that die of hunger? Well, it is the same cause. Because some or all of the humans use the means for themselves. And the more they have, they use it just for themselves. And wanting to keep their standard, they must throw away the food that could feed all other people on earth. You see, yes, we are many on this earth, and some think we are too many. But how do I judge that if I'm not a God? How much is too much or too many? And they think, yes, we have to reduce them. But reality is that even with this amount of people on earth, the earth, through God's active power, gives enough food for everyone. And more than that, everyone could be fed. But millions die. Why? Because everyone keeps it for himself. One to keep his standard. Now, through God's mercy, we have social systems. In some countries more and others less. But even social systems can be very dangerous. It's like in medication. If we use the medication that we need to solving acute emergency for a continuing medication, we get into trouble. When we don't see that we must help in a social system acute a situation, but if we think we must keep them on food all the time, then the social system becomes a curse. Because it now does not make humans happy by doing themselves something after the principle of God that says, "He who does not work shall not eat." Some find it hard. Yes, it might be hard, but it is the truth. Everyone is only happy when he does something. It doesn't matter how much he does, but he does something to earn his food. Or he's involved in an activity in which food is given to him. But if we feed the one that are lazy, the social system becomes a curse. So you see, it's like in therapy. If we intervene acute, that's fine with medication. But we have to solve the cause so that we have to quit that. But then it becomes a continual medication because we don't know the cause. And so the same thing we do in social systems. That's why they are ambiguous, they are contradictory. We want to help, but actually we sustain laziness. We sustain irresponsibility. And that shouldn't be like that. But we will discuss more about this in the coming lectures. Why do we have graves? These are many crosses here because it's a military cemetery where people have died. Why do we have wars? Why do we have wars in the family? I think it's one of the most degradable things that we fight with each other. A human being, given reason, should never fight. Should never use violence to impose its own meaning. And it would never do that if it would be just an administrator. One that uses a power in order to give, but it's not for himself. And the result, why do we have deserts on earth where once was flourishing vegetation? We have this on earth because of the way humans treat each other and treat the place God puts them in as administrators. So why do we have so much undescribable suffering and misery in the world? Because man believes he's God and uses all resources of God for himself. And if God would not control actively the results of our misuse, we would not exist anymore. The world would have destroyed. After 2,000 years, the world would have disappeared, or humanity and life from this earth, if God would have not intervened through the flood to save the world. If God would have not intervened and keep through His grace, so that we might become again a steward, what is the reality? Then life would have been extinguished for long from this earth. So, do we want to hear the words that says here in 25, Matthew 25? "34. Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." Do you want to hear those words? Then we must do something. And I hope this study in this quarter will help us to make a difference, to understand the why of suffering, and to understand how to help, but also take care for the cause. Not becoming helpers without solving the issue. May God help us, not only that we understand things, but we put them into practice. And like the people on his right side, they know what to do, and they make a difference in this world to eliminate the suffering and the misery. Amen.